In September 1999, the four daughters of Nelson Fant and Madeline Miller Botts returned to their home in order to celebrate their parents' September birthdays. At that time, we were able to convince Mom and Dad to tell a few stories of the war while we recorded them. Mom had started writing her memoirs of her time during World War II, and Daddy had always told us stories, none of which involved anything very warlike. We're so fortunate to have these videos because our mother passed away on Christmas Day of that same year. It was 15 years before we could bring ourselves to watch these clips, but now that we have done so, we're happy to share them with our cousins and friends. I believe it's very important that these stories are not lost to history's attic. Our mother was with the American troops when they liberated Dachau concentration camp. She did tell us these stories when we were growing up because she realized how important it is that the world not forget the horrors done by human beings against their fellow human beings. Madeline Miller was born in 1921. She met Nelson Botts at Sharpsburg High School when she was a new student and he was a senior. He fell in love at first sight, but there was much to do before they married in 1946. Nelson attended the University of Kentucky, where he studied electrical engineering and was part of the ROTC. Madeline went to nursing school at the Nazareth School of Nursing, part of St. Joseph's Hospital in Lexington. She graduated at the top of her class in 1943, at which time she enlisted into the Army Nursing Corps and was assigned to the 116th Evac Hospital in the European Theater. These hospitals moved to where the action was and worked out of tents. Madeline's main responsibility was to supervise the operating room, keep it sterile in the muddy terrain. They never broke their sterile field, and as a result, their mortality rate was unbelievably low due to infection. For this, and for her ability to stay cool under the pressure of being shot at while saving lives, Madeline was awarded the Bronze Star. By the time the war was over, she had reached the level of captain. Nelson would have to salute her.
Popcorn for the movie.
Action.
Action!
Oh, thank you.
In Stigley set up in a beautiful meadow. In tents, first the nurses and staff enjoyed the weather, but after a while the rains came. The cots stood in the water. The tent pins couldn't grip the saturated soil. The wind blew the stovetops off and blew the latrine screens down. And stopped receiving casualties. The evening shift began at 8. Day nurse and post-op turned her books over to the night nurse. Margaret Murphy, same. We were plenty busy today, but it looks like it will be worse tonight. Over in the shock ward were the most serious cases that kept the nurse watching carefully over her patients, trying to get their vital signs normal enough so that they could be operated on. She said, here's a head and chest case, a bad combination, breathing with a rattle that crackles through the tent like an untuned radio. The next man has his belly ripped open and shrapnel and leg splints sticking out over the end of the third letter. Somehow we managed to get through and transferred all patients to general hospitals. We packed up and were ready to move on. We had our trucks loaded and we nurses were settled in the back of the truck as usual. This happened to be on Easter Sunday. Just as we approached the big bridge crossing the Rhine River, the whole bridge blew up by Germans. There was no way we could go to that route. The drivers of the trucks, also the commanding officer and chief nurse, all got together with their maps and decided which roads we should take. The road was rocky, small, muddy from previous rains and so forth. After traveling till dusk, all the trucks stopped and the decision was made to stay there for the night in an old bombed-out building. But that wasn't the worst condition. They finally told us that we were in German territory, in other words, behind the line. They told us to sleep with our helmets on. None of us were able to sleep. The next morning we looked out the stairway window and saw dog fights. We heard a lot of ack-ack from the artillery. We ate K rations and waited for further orders. Finally, the chief nurse, Captain Poole, came back to tell us it was time to go. This time, they thought we were safe enough for us to travel and find the rest of our unit who had gone on before.
Good heavens.
Is there more on the back of that page?
No.
Yeah, the back of the very last page.
This is for Nelson to do.
After Pearl Harbor, Nelson left the University of Kentucky and enlisted into the Army. He soon attended OCS and was commissioned a second lieutenant. He attended radio school in Fort Monmouth, which was not a surprise, as Nelson had been making radios since he was 12 years old, and top secret radar school in Boca Raton, Florida, becoming an expert at code breaking. His first assignment was Hawaii.
I was shipped to Hawaii, and I was assigned to a radio intelligence company where they were training to copy Japanese code and send it back to the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And I was a second lieutenant. There were about 9 other second lieutenants there, and all of them had various and sundry jobs. But for some reason or another, I was the only one that had ROTC, and they made me do all of the training of the troops. These guys didn't have to get out and do calisthenics. They didn't have to get out and do a whole lot of exercise and all that good stuff. But they did have to get out and learn how to drill halfway. So I got to go out and teach them how to drill. But the thing that was interesting was we got word one time that Franklin Roosevelt was going to come visit us in Hawaii. He was going to visit Hawaii. So we found out that we were located in right in the heart of Honolulu, right at the intersection where there was a park called Lanakila Boulevard and School Street. What are y'all doing?
Looking for the tripod.
It's right there. Anyway, Lanakila Boulevard and School Street. And Lanakila Boulevard was a big boulevard that went all the way to Waikiki as far as I can remember. So Roosevelt was going to get in his vehicle when he landed. Now he had
The Roosevelt.
Franklin D. Roosevelt. He had to get to Hawaii on a ship. They weren't flying people over to Hawaii in those days. So he arrived, and they had to prepare an open sedan car for him. And we found out and discovered, the current captain of our outfit, was informed by the major in charge of both these companies that we were going to have to stand and salute him as he went by. So the captain rushed over and found me, and he said I had to organize this company to stand at attention along the way where Roosevelt was going to go, but I wasn't going to be seen. I had to skip back inside a little alcove, or a little shed's what it was, with the door open. And when I saw Roosevelt coming, being higher than the rest of the group, I had to call attention over a PA system and tell everybody to come to attention as Roosevelt went rolling by. And so help me, before we knew it, we heard this rustling way up the street, and here comes a big bunch of people walking alongside of the car, and an automobile or 2 or 3, and then along comes Roosevelt. And I was never so shocked in my life to see this guy sitting in this sedan with the top down. 4 people were in it. The driver was an officer. The guy sitting beside him was a plainclothes guy with a weapon. The guy sitting beside Roosevelt probably had a weapon, but he was, I think, Secretary of State at that time, but I don't remember who he was. But he went by. His face was big, fat, and red, and he had a cigarette in his mouth that stuck way up in the air, and he was grinning and laughing and waving at everybody as he went by. And as he got close enough, I hollered, "Attention!" And this entire group of people, 700 people, came, snapped to attention. You could hear them hopping all over the place. And as he went by, here I was hidden up there behind everybody. Nobody could see me, and I was scared to death because somebody was that was in the entourage was gonna shoot me. Because I was hidden, but yet they could see me. And I had this big microphone up in front of my face as I hollered attention, and I looked just like I might have had a weapon. So I was scared to death after I got to realize just what situation I was in. So he went on by finally, and everybody, I called everybody to attention, told them to get, it was dismissed, everybody left. We just had a great time, but I did get to see Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Did you vote for him?
First and last time. Oh, yeah.
Huh.
One terrible time. They always came to me to do these jobs that I'd already done somewhere else before.
Would you tell a story real quick about how the black guy saved your life?
Goodness sakes, that's in my other thing. What, now?
Between the two boats?
Now?
Just real
Yeah.
quick. I love that
It's
story.
not a really long one.
Well, I was assigned the job of taking 7 of the most brightest people from this radio intelligence company to Iwo Jima. And Iwo Jima was but not very far away, really. So they call them typhoons out in Hawaii, out in the Pacific Ocean. They had a typhoon, tearing everything all to pieces, and it zoomed over the top of the island. But we weren't allowed not to go. We were had to board ship with all of this equipment that they had assigned to me, and I was given accommodations in my private cabin aboard this Liberty ship. And I felt so proud. Here I was a second lieutenant, you know.
How big was the ship?
Just a Liberty ship. I don't know how big it was. I forgot the name, but it was a long way down to the water, I'll tell you, buddy.
Why do they call it a Liberty
About
ship?
100 feet from where top
Carried
of it.
soldiers.
Anyway,
Period.
we got on this thing, and the waves were rolling, and it seemed like it was tilting to the side, and I thought I could reach down and touch the water. But of course I couldn't. But it tilted so far from one side and then to the other. And of course, in order to get out of the island, off the island there in Hawaii, we had to take on, what do you call them? The guy that guides you through the harbor.
Captain.
This was pilot. The
Pilot,
pilot
right.
got aboard.
I knew that.
And he
I knew that.
probably
From one
he
end of
should
the
have
boat
told
to
me.
the other.
Anyway, he got aboard, and it got so rough that when he got us out of the harbor, he couldn't get off the ship. They would not let him off because they couldn't get the little tugboat close enough to him to let him off. So he had to go with us all the way to Iwo Jima.
Oh,
At
no!
that time, Iwo Jima had been, we were going there in the middle of April. Iwo Jima was attacked in February, and I had been assigned to take this group aboard into Iwo Jima on the 5th wave that went in. It just so happened that they didn't want to lose all this technical equipment after they found out that it was too difficult to land on Iwo Jima. So they reissued our orders so that we didn't have to go until a month and a half after that. But we did go, and when we pulled up to the, what you might call
Was Iwo Jima still occupied?
partially, yeah. But they'd surrendered. They were mopping up the Japanese at the time we landed there. Suribachi was right off our starboard bow. It was the right-hand side of the ship up front.
Okay.
Starboard bow. Anyway, the only way we could get off was to get off, climb down rope nets that they hung over the side of the boat. And we had to crawl down these things and get on an LST, landing ship transporter, landing ship troop, big thing like they had landed on Iwo Jima and all the shores with, where the front end of it flops down and goes down the water. So anyway, it came my turn to crawl down this thing. I said, boy, I know how to climb down a rope ladder. Anybody can do that, to myself. And I had this 75 pack on my back, carbine strung over my shoulder, and I handed it down to the guy down in the LST. He took the weapon, and I kept my 45 on my side, and I kind of hung it a little bit on the rope. And just as I got down ready to step aboard the LST, my foot slipped down on the inside down inside this big rope, which was about an inch in diameter. It was a big web made out of rope. You've seen it. And here was this rocking. The storm was still fairly going on, and the boat would come up and hit the side of the ship. Crash! And the ship had great big dents in it where it had hit. And the LST was just nearly torn up, probably from something else. But there was a big backman who was a member of a Cooks and Bakers team that had been assigned up to Iwo Jima and set up cook mess hall. And just as I fell in between, the boat was leaving. It was leaving and moving away from the ship. And as it was coming on in, and I was down up to my shoulders in this thing, it was coming toward me, and this big hulk of a man, this black man, reached down with one great big ham arm and grabbed the top of my pack, which has straps around it, and lifted me straight up with his arm and dropped me down inside this hole. Now that drop was about 12 feet. And when I landed, I was so happy. I was so happy. I reached up and patted him on the foot. He reached down and grinned at me, and I was so busy when we got onto shore that I was never able to go back and find him in his mess hall area and thank him for saving my life. So, at that particular point of time, those few seconds, your all's future was horribly in danger.
Jeopardy. We stayed in Marseille, which is in France, about a week, and continued to work night duty to relieve the nurses as they were just exhausted. They had been working from D-Day all through Angio Beachhead and North African campaign. At the end of the week, we were loaded on a big old army truck and once again left a destination unknown as the 116th Instruments and Supplies hadn't caught up with us. Now you understand we're going to be attached to another hospital until our supplies get to us.
And where were you? Marseille.
Marseille, France. That's where we went in.
Susan has a question.
And what point was this of the war? After? It was
What year?
Oh no, this was on the way.
Before,
It was
before the Battle of the Bulge?
Battle of
Oh
the
yeah,
Bulge.
before the
Right,
Battle of the Bulge.
right
We went
But
from
just
New York
before.
into Marseille. We were supposed to go to Le Havre, France, but there were too much bombing and too many enemies, what have you, in that area. So we went all around through the Strait of Gibraltar, and you'll be able to see that on the maps that Libya's fixed.
all right.
After we had traveled a couple of days by truck, we were told we would go by train. I had visions of a nice place to sit and good food. This was not what happened. Instead, we had to get on a boxcar, sit on our duffel bag or the floor. We had to observe blackout at night as we were very close to the enemy lines. Instead of going to the dining room for our meals, they stopped the train, and KP, the food department, made us fresh coffee and some hot food, and we ate outside the railroad trucks, which you have pictures of. At last, we had traveled about 250 miles north from Marseille through Nancy and on to Sarrebourg, France, where we finally set up our own 116th attack and started to operate. Even though we were in tents and the weather was cold, about 20 below zero, we were glad to be together finally and doing our own thing. In spite of the fact we had a large Red Cross over our hospital area, we were strafed each night around midnight. It was as though it was a signal for the enemy to drop a few bombs and strafe the hospital. We were very lucky in that no one was killed, but we did have extensive injuries that had to come to our surgery department to be taken care of. One night, shells came through the operating room and hit one of the corpsmen and injured the patient that I was prepping.
Oh,
Um,
so close.
It was from December the 16th to the latter part of January that we were strafed.
What is strafe? Excuse me.
The planes came down, left,
Just
yeah.
down, down.
Exactly.
Shot, bullets?
Bullets shooting out
The
at you.
casualties started coming in by the truckload. Sometimes we thought nothing and working around the clock trying to take care of everyone. During this period, we noticed and were also told by the soldiers that there were fresh troops just over from the States.
This experience was during what we know of as the Battle of the Bulge. While all the bombing was going on, the doctors and nurses were saving lives. Mom's main objective was keeping a sterile field in the OR tent in order to minimize infection. For the bravery and strength of character shown by Madeline Miller during this time, she was awarded the Bronze Star. The four Bott sisters always knew that our mother had been a nurse in World War II. She told us from an early age about the barbarity committed at Dachau concentration camp and how at the end of the war she was there with the 116th Evacuation Hospital trying to heal the victims left alive. No one was ever allowed to tell us they doubted the stories. We knew our mom was there. Mom didn't get a chance to write that part of her memoir before she entered the hospital for heart surgery. Little did we know that she would pass away that year. One observation Mom told us was how the survivors were bones, sinew, and skin. The photo of the ovens she had no hesitation to show us and said that everyone needed to see this and never allow such evil to reign again. Though I don't have Mom's written words about Dachau, I have found other narratives from her fellow nurses and will read a little from them. From Constance J. Moore, Colonel, ANC, retired. In early May 1945, 80 nurses attached to the 116th and 127th evacuation hospitals came into the newly liberated Dachau concentration camp to care for the disease-ravaged, starved victims of the Nazi regime. The nurses soon discovered that a typhus epidemic raged behind the gates, killing nearly 400 prisoners each day. From Lieutenant Charlotte Johnston, bodies were piled everywhere. There was a bloody ditch piled with bodies where prisoners would bleed to death after having their throats slit. From Captain Franklin, my mind couldn't assimilate the scene rapidly. I couldn't understand how it could be or why it was done. The staff felt as if they were dancing with death and wondered if it would ever stop. After IV fluids and vitamins were administered for a few days and the starved patients became stronger, they were fed diluted cereal and milk, then soup until they were back on their feet and could be transported to their home countries to try to find their families and put their lives back together. The 116th was at Dachau for 6 weeks, during which time Germany had surrendered. They were given a 7-day R&R in Switzerland while waiting for further orders.
What about Switzerland?
Switzerland was an ideal 7-day vacation. We went to Zurich and we were given an itinerary. Everything was on schedule. And all the buildings were immaculately clean and in pastel shades.
Oh.
All the buildings, different shades. Even the railroad track. We went up to the mountain on this railroad train, open front. That's the one Madeline tried to tear up someone's picture.
I cut out anybody who wasn't daddy from mine.
I had a lot of
Famous doctors and generals.
yeah.
Sorry.
And so that's where I went
Protected.
sailing.
What did you wear on a vacation like that?
Dressed greens with pink skirt.
Oh,
Pink skirt.
And
Pink,
what kind of shoes?
a regular GI shoes, not scoundrel boots.
Okay.
And O's.
She knows
Yeah,
what
that's
I'm
the name of the book
Yeah.
I'm gonna write.
And then
My
I
mother
had
did her combat
a
boots.
pink top coat that I wore over there.
It's really
Did they
nice.
issue you all these clothes or you had to buy
I
them
had
extra?
them made in New York.
But they were regulation.
They were regulation. enough.
Enough?
Madeline and Nelson returned from overseas and married in May 1946. They set up housekeeping on the University of Kentucky campus, married students housing, also known as Cooperstown, from where Daddy continued his studies as an electrical engineer and Mom continued her nursing career. Between 1947 and 1958, 4 daughters were born into the Botts family. Mom worked as director of nursing for some years and continued her education to become a certified cardiac nurse. She set up the first cardiac care units in the Lexington hospitals, and her CCU plans were used throughout the country as well as with the VA hospitals. She always said that her love was actual nursing and spent much of her career doing bedside nursing. Nelson's career was with Texas Instruments, where he was part of the research and development department with like-minded engineers. He invented that little thermostat that we still use to beep when our clothes are dry. In addition, his department worked on projects for NASA, but we all liked the thermostat thing. Mom passed away on Christmas Day, 1999, and Daddy joined her 10 years later. They had a good life together, raised loving daughters, and left a legacy of which to be proud. That evening in September 1999 that we spent listening to the stories of our parents' experiences in their 20s confirmed to us that they were indeed part of the greatest generation.